Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey back in time, not to a whimsical land of knights and dragons, but right into the jewel-encrusted, yet surprisingly uncomfortable, reality of a medieval queen. Imagine the rustle of heavy silk, the scent of expensive incense mixing with the pervasive dampness of a stone castle, and the constant, watchful gaze of 100 courtiers. You're adorned with a crown, but it feels less like a symbol of power and more like a gilded cage. You probably won't survive this journey with your sanity intact, let alone your life, because being a queen in the Middle Ages was less fairy tale and more grueling, politically charged duty. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken in a cavernous bedchamber, the morning light barely piercing the heavy tapestries that line the walls. The air is cool, perhaps even a little damp, and the distant sounds of the castle stirring begin to filter in the clatter of servants, the whinny of a horse, the muffled shouts of guards. As your ladies-in-waiting begin the elaborate process of dressing you, you feel the familiar weight of your status settle upon you. This isn't just about silks and furs. It's about the immense pressure that comes with the crown's heavy weight. You are a queen, a symbol, a vessel for the kingdom's future, and your personal desires often count for very little. Your day is not your own. From the moment you rise, you are on display, your every move observed, judged, and whispered about. You might attend early morning mass in the castle chapel, then preside over a small court gathering, listening to petitions from vassals or disputes among courtiers. You might oversee the household accounts, a complex task involving vast sums of money and intricate records of supplies, provisions, and wages for hundreds of servants. This isn't just playing dress-up, it's running a massive, complex enterprise, equivalent to a modern CEO managing a sprawling corporation. But without the benefit of spreadsheets or a personal assistant, a mainstream historical fact is that many medieval queens were highly educated and actively involved in the administration of their royal households and even the governance of their realms, particularly when their husbands were away on campaign. You might spend hours poring over documents, dictating letters to scribes, or engaging in delicate negotiations with foreign envoys. Your reputation for wisdom and competence could directly impact your husband's standing and the stability of the kingdom. You are expected to be pious, charitable, beautiful, and intelligent, all while maintaining an air of serene regality. You might joke, grimly, that your job description was roughly perfect human being, but also a glorified accountant. The physical demands of your role are also considerable. The elaborate gowns, though beautiful, are heavy, restrictive, and often uncomfortable, designed more for appearance than ease of movement. Your head might ache from the weight of your crown, or the intricate jeweled coif beneath it. You're constantly on your feet, moving from one audience to another, from the chapel to the great hall, always maintaining your composure, always aware of the eyes upon you. A quirky tidbit to maintain a pale complexion, a sign of nobility. Some queens would use concoctions of lead and vinegar on their skin, unknowingly exposing themselves to poisoning. So much for beauty standards. Historians still argue whether medieval queens truly held significant political power, or if their influence was primarily symbolic and indirect, while some, like Eleanor of Aquitaine, famously wielded immense power. Many others found their agency severely limited by patriarchal norms and the ever-present shadow of their husband's authority. Your actions are scrutinized for any perceived overreach, any hint of ambition that might displease your king or his powerful male advisors. As the day wears on, you attend banquets, receive gifts, and entertain noble guests. Every interaction is a performance, every smile a calculation. You are never truly alone, never truly off duty. The weight of the crown isn't just physical, it's the crushing burden of expectation, the constant pressure to perform, to serve the interests of your dynasty, and to secure the future of the kingdom through your very existence. And as you finally prepare for bed, The heavy silence of the castle walls seems to echo with the profound isolation of being a queen, a woman admired, revered, but rarely truly understood. As you contemplate the crushing weight of your crown, you realize that the most fundamental aspect of your life as a medieval queen was something you had no say in whatsoever: your marriage. No love match. Your union was not born of affection or personal choice, but of strategic alliances, political necessity, and the cold, calculated interests of kingdoms. Imagine yourself as a young girl, perhaps barely into your teens. When the negotiations for your hand began, you might have been taught courtly graces, languages, and the tenets of your faith. But rarely were you asked about your preferences for a future husband. Your worth was assessed not by your personality or your dreams, but by your dowry, the lands, wealth, or strategic advantages you brought to the union. A mainstream historical fact is that royal marriages in the Middle Ages were almost exclusively dynastic and political tools, designed to forge alliances, consolidate power, or end conflicts between kingdoms. You were a living treaty, a human bond between warring or negotiating factions. You might be betrothed to a prince you'd never met, from a distant land with a foreign tongue and unfamiliar customs. The initial encounter would be awkward, stiff, scrutinized by dozens of watchful eyes. There was no time for courtship, no space for genuine connection. Your wedding day would be a grand spectacle, a display of wealth and power. But for you, it was merely the formalization of a contract, a public declaration of your new servitude to a foreign crown. You might joke, wryly, that your wedding planner was probably a diplomat, and your vows sounded suspiciously like a peace treaty. Your new husband, the king, might be a stranger, an older man, or perhaps even a child. He might be kind, cruel, indifferent, or even a leper, as some historical figures were. Your personal feelings were irrelevant. Your duty was to serve his interests, and by extension, the interests of his kingdom. Your primary function in this union, a theme we'll explore further, was reproductive. The lack of personal agency in choosing your partner could lead to deep unhappiness and loneliness. You were surrounded by people, yet often felt utterly isolated. Courtiers, always watchful, might whisper if you seemed too cold, too distant, or if you failed to immediately charm your new court. You were expected to adapt, to assimilate, to seamlessly become the queen of a new land, even if you longed for the familiar comforts of your childhood home. Historians still argue whether medieval queens genuinely found affection or even love within these arranged marriages. While some unions undoubtedly grew into partnerships of respect and even fondness, many remained purely transactional, characterized by duty rather than devotion. The expectation was not happiness, but stability and progeny. A quirky tidbit: some medieval marriage contracts would even specify the number of male heirs expected, or the conditions under which a marriage could be annulled if it failed to produce a male heir. Your value literally decreased with each barren year. The pressure to conceive, especially a son, would loom over your entire married life, a constant, silent judgment from your court and kingdom. The lack of emotional connection could also make you vulnerable. If your husband preferred mistresses, or if he was simply uninterested in you, you had little recourse. Your position was precarious, tied intrinsically to your ability to fulfill your dynastic role. You couldn't simply pack your bags and leave. Divorce was rare and almost impossible for a queen unless granted by papal decree for specific, often political, reasons. So, as you step into the vast, echoing halls of your new castle, you understand that your queenly status, while grand, began with a fundamental sacrifice of personal liberty. Your marriage was a testament to the intricate web of medieval power politics, a union of crowns rather than hearts. It was the first, and perhaps most enduring, reminder that, in the Middle Ages, a queen's life was not her own. With your marriage now a political reality, the most immediate and terrifying pressure you face as a medieval queen becomes agonizingly clear: childbearing's deadly peril. Your primary, non-negotiable duty is to produce an heir, preferably male, to secure the succession and the future of the dynasty. This wasn't a choice. It was a biological imperative laden with immense danger. Imagine the anticipation and dread that would accompany each suspected pregnancy. Every ache, every wave of nausea, would be scrutinized by your ladies, your physicians, and ultimately, the entire court. A mainstream historical fact is that childbirth was the leading cause of death for women in the Middle Ages, regardless of their social standing. Royal women, despite access to the best available care, were just as vulnerable to complications like hemorrhage, infection, puerperal fever, and eclampsia. You might joke, grimly, that your royal bedchamber during labor was less a place of regal comfort and more a medieval battlefield. The process itself was arduous and often prolonged. You would labor in a specially prepared chamber, often draped in rich fabrics but lacking anything resembling modern hygiene. Midwives, usually experienced local women, would attend you, relying on traditional knowledge and prayers. Physicians, if present, might offer herbal concoctions or attempts at positioning, but their understanding of obstetrics was extremely limited. Instruments were crude, and the concept of sterility was entirely unknown. Imagine the fear of infection, a silent, invisible killer that could strike days after a seemingly successful birth. The pressure to produce a male heir was immense. Daughters were valuable for future dynastic marriages, but a son was crucial for continuity, especially in kingdoms where succession laws favored male primogeniture. If your first child was a daughter, the relief of a live birth would quickly be tempered by renewed pressure for a boy. Each subsequent daughter would heighten the anxiety, casting a shadow of disappointment over your court and potentially jeopardizing your position. A quirky tidbit: some medieval medical texts prescribed bizarre remedies for ensuring a male child, such as consuming specific animal parts or engaging in intercourse during certain phases of the moon. Historians still argue whether royal women were more or less likely to die in childbirth compared to commoners, while commoners lacked access to any medical professionals. Royal women were often subjected to interventions by physicians with limited anatomical understanding, which could sometimes do more harm than good. The constant cycle of pregnancy, birth, and lactation if you nursed your own child, which many queens did not. Preferring wet nurses would take a tremendous toll on your body, often leaving you weakened and more susceptible to other illnesses. Beyond the immediate danger of childbirth, there was the agony of infant and child mortality. Even if you survived the birth, your precious heir might succumb to childhood diseases within weeks, months, or a few years. You would experience the profound grief of losing a child, only to be expected to embark on yet another pregnancy almost immediately. Your body was not entirely your own. It was a dynastic factory, constantly pressured to produce. The lack of personal control over your reproductive life was total. You couldn't choose when to conceive, or how many children to have. Your husband's desires and the needs of the dynasty dictated your procreative destiny. If you were barren or consistently produced only daughters, your position could become incredibly precarious. You might face the threat of annulment, being sent to a convent, or even being subtly poisoned and replaced by a more fertile queen. So, as you brace for another pregnancy, feeling the familiar stirrings of life within you, you understand that this fundamental duty is also your greatest personal risk. The cheers for a newborn prince would be a fleeting joy, quickly overshadowed by the ever-present shadow of infection, the constant anxiety for the child's survival, and the looming possibility of yet another life-threatening delivery. Being a medieval queen meant living under the perpetual threat of your own biology, a terrifying gamble with every single breath. Even if you survived the perils of childbirth and successfully produced a male heir, your life as a medieval queen was far from one of unbridled power. More often than not, you found yourself a political pawn, not power, navigating a complex web of alliances and rivalries with limited direct agency. Your influence was usually indirect, exerted through subtle means rather than overt authority. Imagine attending a royal council meeting. You might be present, seated prominently beside your king, adorned in your finest silks and jewels. But as the male nobles, bishops, and advisors debate weighty matters of state, war, peace, taxation, justice, your voice, if it's heard at all, is usually a whisper. You are expected to offer counsel when asked, to support your husband's decisions, and to maintain a dignified silence otherwise. A mainstream historical fact is that while some medieval queens, through exceptional personality or specific circumstances, wielded significant political power, the vast majority operated within severe patriarchal constraints, with their influence often relying on their husband's favor or their role as a mother. You might joke that your role in council was primarily to look regal and nod sagely. Even if you were secretly doing calculus in your head, your primary political value often lay in your connections. You were a daughter of one powerful house, now the wife of another. This made you a crucial link in diplomatic relations. You might be expected to write letters to your birth family, conveying messages or pleading cases on behalf of your husband. You might host foreign dignitaries, subtly gathering intelligence, or acting as a calming presence during tense negotiations. Your ability to charm, to mediate, and to build relationships was a political skill, but it was rarely a direct exercise of power. Your influence was often tied to your capacity as a dynastic mother, if your son was young. You might have a period of regency, a topic we'll explore later. But even then, your authority was often challenged by ambitious male relatives. If your husband died, and your son was an adult, your direct political role would diminish significantly, transitioning to that of a dowager queen, whose influence came primarily from advice and moral authority. Historians still argue whether the indirect power wielded by queens through their domestic influence, patronage, and informal networks was as significant as, or more so than, overt political authority. While you might not issue decrees or lead armies, you could influence appointments, champion certain causes, or subtly guide your husband's opinions. Your household staff, your ladies-in-waiting, and your chaplains could all be vital sources of information and channels of influence. A quirkier tidbit is that queens often acted as patrons of the arts, literature, and religious institutions, which allowed them to shape cultural trends and gain moral authority, a subtle form of power projection. However, this indirect influence was fragile. It depended entirely on your husband's trust and affection, or on your son's loyalty, if you fell out of favor, or if your political usefulness waned. Your position could become incredibly precarious. You could be sidelined, ignored, or even imprisoned if deemed a threat. Remember, your marriage was a contract, and if you failed to deliver on its implicit political promises, there were consequences. The constant need to be politically astute, without appearing overtly ambitious, was a delicate balancing act. You had to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics, identifying allies and rivals, understanding the unspoken rules of power. Your survival often depended on your ability to read situations, interpret subtle cues, and act with cunning and discretion. You were a player in a high-stakes game, but often with a severely limited hand. So, as you sit on your throne, listening to the debates of men, you understand that your crown is as much a gilded cage as it is a symbol of authority. You are an asset, a tool, a symbol, and a mother to the future king. But true, independent power is a rare and fleeting thing for a medieval queen, often shadowed by the very structures designed to uphold your regal status. Your reign is defined by duty, not by a genuine ability to command. Even with your understanding of your limited political agency, the reality of court life as a medieval queen was far from a sedate existence. You were constantly immersed in a bubbling cauldron of court intrigue and backstabbing, a treacherous world where whispers could be deadlier than daggers, and a misplaced word could lead to your downfall. Imagine the atmosphere in the Great Hall during a royal feast. Superficially, it's a scene of splendor, rich fabrics, glittering jewels, the scent of roasted meats and fine wines. But beneath the veneer of politeness, every smile is a potential mask, every conversation a veiled negotiation. You are perpetually surrounded by courtiers, nobles, and ambitious servants, all vying for favor, power, and wealth. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval courts were hotbeds of conspiracy, gossip, and factionalism, where personal ambitions often clashed with dynastic loyalties. You might joke that your court was less a royal household and more a season of survivor, but with better costumes and much higher stakes. Your vulnerability as a queen was magnified by your foreignness. If you came from another kingdom, you would initially be seen as an outsider, distrusted by the native nobility who feared your influence over the king. They would constantly test your loyalties, seeking any sign that you favored your birth family over your new realm. Every decision you made, every person you befriended, would be scrutinized for political implications. Rivals for power were everywhere. There might be ambitious male relatives of the king, brothers, uncles, cousins, who saw your childless state or lack of male heirs as an opportunity to usurp the throne. There were also the king's mistresses, who, if they bore him a child, could pose a serious threat to your dynastic legitimacy and your position as queen. Imagine the quiet tension, the forced smiles, when you had to interact with a woman who overtly shared your husband's bed and perhaps even produced a son he openly acknowledged. Gossip and slander were potent weapons. A carefully spread rumor about your piety, your intelligence, or even your fidelity could severely undermine your standing. Accusations of witchcraft, adultery, or even poisoning were not uncommon, and, if they gained traction, could lead to a swift and brutal downfall. You had to be constantly vigilant, discerning who to trust amidst a sea of sycophants and potential betrayers. Your ladies-in-waiting, while ostensibly loyal, might also be spies for rival factions, reporting your private conversations or personal habits. Historians still argue whether medieval queens actively engaged in backstabbing themselves, or if they were primarily victims of male-dominated political machinations. While many sources portray them as passive figures, others suggest that shrewd queens learned to play the game, forming alliances, using patronage, and even deploying their own intelligence networks to protect their interests and promote their allies. A quirky tidbit: some queens employed dwarf jesters, or personal fools, not just for entertainment, but also as a source of unfiltered information. As these individuals were often overlooked or dismissed as harmless, the stakes in this game were incredibly high. Failure to navigate the intrigue could mean losing favor, seeing your children disinherited, facing imprisonment, or even accusations of treason, which carried the ultimate penalty. You couldn't just retreat from court life. Your presence was a political necessity. You had to learn to read the subtle cues, the glances, the inflections in voices, to understand who was truly an ally and who was a viper waiting to strike. So, as you circulate among the glittering courtiers, offering pleasantries and feigning interest, you are constantly assessing, analyzing, and protecting yourself. The heavy jewels around your neck feel less like adornments and more like armor. You learn to guard your words, to trust few, and to cultivate an impenetrable facade of serenity. Being a medieval queen meant living in a gilded cage of constant surveillance and psychological warfare, where survival often depended less on outright power and more on cunning, discretion, and an unblinking awareness of the invisible knives waiting in the shadows. Beyond the suffocating intrigue of the court, your life as a medieval queen presented another immense, often overlooked challenge: the relentless physical ordeal of life on the road. Constant travel. You weren't settled in one magnificent castle. Rather, you were perpetually in motion, moving between royal residences, manors, and even across kingdoms, a demanding itinerary that would exhaust even the hardiest modern traveler. Imagine the sheer scale of a royal progress. You wouldn't travel lightly. A mainstream historical fact is that a medieval queen's entourage could number in the hundreds, sometimes even thousands, including personal ladies-in-waiting, chaplains, scribes, household knights, cooks, musicians, and countless servants, all accompanied by their own baggage, carts, and horses. It was less a journey and more a slow-moving city on the hoof. You might joke that packing for a royal trip meant packing an entire castle's worth of stuff, just in smaller, more portable pieces. Your mode of transport would typically be a horse-drawn litter or a carriage, often elaborately decorated. But far from comfortable. Medieval roads were notoriously bad, rutted, muddy, dusty, and often unsafe. You'd be jostled endlessly, bumping along at a snail's pace, the constant jarring a torment to your body. Imagine days, even weeks, spent in this manner, the sun beating down or the rain soaking through the canvas, the cold seeping into your bones. Your elaborate gowns, designed for courtly splendor, were utterly impractical for such journeys, adding to your discomfort. The pace was dictated by the slowest members of the entourage and the condition of the roads. You might cover only 10 to 20 miles a day, meaning even relatively short distances between royal estates could take days or weeks. Along the way, you would rely on designated stopping points, friendly abbeys, noble castles, or royal hunting lodges. While these offered shelter, they were not always prepared for such a massive influx of people, leading to often cramped and chaotic living conditions. Feeding and housing such a large retinue on the move was a monumental logistical challenge. Provisions had to be sourced locally or carried, and security was a constant concern. With the threat of bandits or rival lords, you might sometimes find yourself encamped in a temporary tented village, exposed to the elements, or staying in a drafty, unprepared manor house that felt little better than roughing it. A quirkier tidbit: royal progresses often served a practical purpose beyond mere travel. They allowed the monarch to visibly demonstrate their authority across their realm, collect taxes, dispense justice, and consume local resources, thus reducing the burden on any single royal household. Historians still argue whether the constant travel imposed a greater physical and mental toll on queens compared to kings, given the added burdens of pregnancy and elaborate attire. While kings often traveled with armies or for hunting, queens' travels were frequently tied to administrative duties, pilgrimages, or dynastic visits, requiring a different kind of endurance. The lack of consistent hygiene on the road was another significant challenge. Access to clean water for washing was limited, and private latrines were a rarity. You would experience the pervasive smell of unwashed bodies, animals, and human waste that was simply an accepted part of medieval travel. Disease, remember, was a constant companion, and long journeys in unhygienic conditions only increased your vulnerability to infections and parasites. You might develop aches and pains from the constant jarring, or suffer from digestive upsets due to changes in diet and water quality. So, as you gaze out from the narrow window of your jostling carriage, watching the endless procession of carts and horses, you feel the profound weariness settle into your bones. The glamour of being a queen is stripped away by the raw reality of medieval travel. You are perpetually unsettled, constantly adapting to new environments, and always acutely aware of the vast distances that separate you from any semblance of a truly permanent home. Your crown might be magnificent, but its weight is felt most acutely during these endless, bone-jarring journeys across your sprawling kingdom. You've traversed vast distances, endured rough roads, and navigated treacherous court politics. Now, let's step inside the very places you called home, the medieval castles and palaces. From a distance, they radiate power and grandeur, but as a queen, you quickly discover that splendor masks discomfort, and what appears luxurious often conceals a surprising lack of basic modern comforts and even fundamental hygiene. Imagine your royal chambers in a grand castle. The walls might be adorned with richly woven tapestries depicting hunting scenes or biblical stories, providing both insulation and artistic beauty. The furniture might be carved from dark, heavy wood, perhaps inlaid with precious metals. Silver goblets and ornate dishes might grace your table, but look closer, and the reality begins to set in. You might joke that your luxury suite was essentially a very elaborate stone tent. Firstly, heating was rudimentary. Massive fireplaces were common in great halls and private chambers, but they were often inefficient, belching smoke along with warmth. The sheer volume of stone in a castle meant it was perpetually cold and damp, especially in winter. Imagine huddling close to a roaring fire, still feeling the chill seep into your bones, your breath perhaps misting in the air, even indoors. Layers of heavy clothing were a necessity, not just a fashion statement. Historians still argue about the precise internal temperatures of medieval castles, while fires provided localized warmth. Overall comfort levels were far below modern expectations. Then there's lighting. Beyond the flickering flames of the fireplace, the primary sources were candles and rushlights, casting dim, dancing shadows. Reading or intricate needlework would strain your eyes, and vast sections of the castle would remain perpetually gloomy. Imagine trying to conduct affairs of state, or even just entertain yourself, in such limited illumination, your eyes constantly adjusting to the gloom. But perhaps the most striking contrast between splendor and discomfort lies in hygiene. Running water was a rarity, certainly not piped directly into your private chambers. Washing would involve servants bringing heated water in basins. Personal bathing was less frequent than in modern times, though medieval elites certainly bathed more often than popular myth suggests. However, the disposal of human waste was a major issue. While some castles had rudimentary latrines, garden globes built into the walls, emptying into moats or cesspits below. These were often smelly and difficult to clean. You would be constantly aware of the pervasive odors that permeated even the grandest residences. A quirky tidbit is that fresh rushes and herbs were regularly strewn on floors in great halls to absorb waste and mask smells. But this also created a breeding ground for pests and bacteria. So, your fragrant floor was also a giant germ magnet. Pests were an ever-present nuisance. Fleas, lice, and rats were common inhabitants of even the cleanest castles, carrying diseases and disrupting sleep. Imagine waking up to the scuttling of mice behind the tapestries, or the persistent itch of unseen bites. A constant reminder that nature, in all its microscopic glory, was a pervasive presence. Food, while often plentiful at feasts, could also be a source of discomfort. Preservation methods were limited, meaning food spoilage was common. Meats were heavily spiced to mask rancidity, and fresh produce was seasonal. You might dine on lavish banquets, but your digestive system might suffer from the richness or from subtly spoiled ingredients, despite the thick walls and impressive fortifications. Privacy was also a luxury. Your chamber was often accessible to your ladies-in-waiting, servants, and even courtiers. True solitude was rare, another aspect of the constant public performance of queenly life. So, as you recline on a richly embroidered chair in your private chamber, warmed by a roaring fire, you are simultaneously aware of the damp chill in the corners, the dim light, and the faint, underlying odors of a pre-modern world. The splendor is undeniable, a visual feast of power and wealth, but it serves as a thin veneer over a daily reality that, by modern standards, was uncomfortable, unhygienic, and constantly challenged your physical well-being. Being a queen meant living in magnificent surroundings, but often yearning for the simple, unseen conveniences we now take for granted. As you navigate the surprisingly uncomfortable splendor of your royal abode, you realize that your entire upbringing as a medieval queen was meticulously crafted, not for personal fulfillment, but for dynastic utility. Your formative years were dominated by an education for duty, not delight, meticulously preparing you for the intricate, often unforgiving, demands of your future role. Imagine yourself as a young princess, a future queen. From a very early age, your days were not filled with carefree play, but with rigorous instruction. While your brothers might be learning swordsmanship and military tactics, your curriculum was entirely different, yet equally demanding. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval royal women received a comprehensive education focused on literacy, piety, household management, and often, multiple languages. You might joke that your kindergarten involved learning how to run a small kingdom before you could tie your own shoes. Your primary instruction would be in piety and religious observance. You would be taught to read and write, primarily in Latin, so you could study religious texts, transcribe scriptures, and lead household prayers. Your faith was not just personal, it was a public duty, a cornerstone of your legitimacy and a model for your subjects. You would learn the lives of saints, the intricacies of doctrine, and the importance of charitable works. Imagine spending hours copying illuminated manuscripts, your fingers cramped, your eyes straining in the dim light, all in the service of spiritual devotion and literacy. Next came household management and administration. This was far more complex than simply overseeing servants. You would learn how to manage vast estates, overseeing agricultural production, collecting rents, and managing vast household budgets. You would understand how to provision a castle for hundreds of people, how to organize elaborate feasts, and how to maintain the complex hierarchy of a royal court. This practical training was vital, as queens were often responsible for managing the royal domain in their husband's absence, or for their own independent dower lands. You would also be instructed in courtly etiquette and diplomacy. This involved learning the intricate rules of social interaction, how to present yourself with grace and dignity, how to converse with nobles and foreign envoys, and how to write formal letters. You might learn strategies for subtle persuasion, for mediating disputes, and for navigating the treacherous waters of court politics without appearing overly ambitious. Languages were also crucial. You would likely learn the language of your future husband's court. Alongside French, the lingua franca of much of medieval Europe and perhaps others, depending on your family's alliances. A quirky tidbit is that some noblewomen even received basic training in falconry or hunting, not just for leisure, but as a way to understand the management of large estates and to participate in a traditionally male activity, subtly showcasing their capabilities. Historians still argue whether the education of medieval royal women truly empowered them or simply reinforced their prescribed gender roles. While literacy and administrative skills were undoubtedly valuable, the curriculum was largely designed to make them effective wives, mothers, and administrators within a patriarchal system, rather than encouraging independent thought or personal ambition outside of these roles. Artistic pursuits, like music, embroidery, or chess, might also be part of your education, but they were often viewed as accomplishments that enhanced your suitability as a queen. Rather than avenues for self-expression, you were being molded, meticulously and rigorously, into the perfect consort, a living embodiment of the virtues and duties required for your high station. So, as you recall the endless lessons, the stern tutors, and the constant emphasis on decorum and responsibility, you understand that your childhood was a long apprenticeship. Every hour of study, every practiced curtsy, every meticulously copied prayer was a brick laid in the foundation of your future queenly life. It was an education designed not to ignite your passions or explore your individual talents, but to prepare you for the unwavering, sometimes suffocating, demands of duty, ensuring you could fulfill your vital role in the grand, unrelenting drama of medieval dynastic power. As your education for duty gives way to the demanding realities of being a queen, you might eventually encounter a period where your influence, paradoxically, becomes more direct and critical during a regency. A brief, dangerous reign, this temporary ascent to power, often when your husband is absent or your son is too young to rule, presents both immense opportunity and terrifying peril. Imagine your husband, the king, departing for a crusade, a lengthy war, or succumbing to illness or an accident, leaving a young, perhaps even infant, heir. Suddenly, the reins of power, which you normally only touched indirectly, are thrust into your hands. You become the regent, the acting ruler in your son's name. A mainstream historical fact is that many medieval queens, such as Blanche of Castile for Louis IX of France or Matilda of Flanders for William II of England, served as highly effective regents, demonstrating remarkable political acumen and strength. You might joke that your maternity leave unexpectedly turned into managing the entire kingdom. This period of regency is a precarious balancing act. On one hand, it's an opportunity to exercise real authority, to make decisions, issue decrees, and influence the direction of the kingdom. You would preside over the royal council, oversee justice, manage finances, and command armies, though rarely in person, more typically through appointed generals. Your experience in household management, honed during your education, would prove invaluable in running the vast machinery of government. You would need to display firmness, wisdom, and an unshakable resolve to maintain stability. On the other hand, a regency was fraught with danger. Your authority was derivative, resting on your status as mother of the legitimate heir. This made you vulnerable. Ambitious male relatives of the king, uncles, brothers, powerful nobles, often viewed a female regent as weak or illegitimate, and would actively try to undermine your authority, seize power for themselves, or even conspire against your son. Imagine the constant vigilance required, discerning true loyalty from thinly veiled ambition. trying to outmaneuver seasoned political operators who saw you as merely a temporary obstacle. You would face immense pressure to prove your capability, to demonstrate that a woman could effectively govern. Any misstep, any sign of weakness, could be exploited by rivals. Financial mismanagement, military defeat, or even a public display of indecision could trigger a crisis. Historians still argue whether the challenges faced by female regents were primarily due to inherent gender bias or simply the general instability inherent in any regency. Regardless of the regent's gender, a quirkier tidbit: some regents would issue charters and documents in their own names alongside their young sons, or even use a special seal, to emphasize their personal authority and to assert their right to rule. Pushing the boundaries of traditional female roles. This subtle assertion of power highlights the inherent tension of the role. The responsibility for your son's safety would also be paramount. He was the future, and any threat to him was a direct threat to your regency. You would need to ensure his protection, his proper education, and his eventual smooth transition to full kingship, all while fending off those who might wish him harm. The length of your regency could vary wildly, from a few months to over a decade. Each year that passed with you at the helm was a testament to your resilience and political skill. However, when your son finally came of age, or your husband returned, your direct power would often diminish, sometimes abruptly. You would revert to your role as queen consort, or dowager queen, advising, but no longer commanding. This transition itself could be fraught with tension, as a son might chafe under a mother's continued influence, or a returning husband might resent her newfound authority. So, as you wield the temporary, yet immense, power of a regent, you feel the exhilaration of genuine authority mingled with the constant thrum of danger. It is a brief, intense period where your personal capabilities are tested to their utmost, and where your successes, though hard-won, lay the groundwork for your dynasty's future, but often at great personal cost and under constant threat. Even when you weren't navigating the treacherous currents of regency or court intrigue, your daily existence as a medieval queen was defined by another subtle, yet pervasive, form of discomfort and constraint: fashion's restrictive cage. Your elaborate attire, designed to signify your status and wealth, was often impractical, uncomfortable, and at times, even painful. Imagine the intricate process of getting dressed each morning. It wasn't a quick affair. You'd be aided by several ladies-in-waiting, meticulously layering heavy fabrics. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval royal gowns, especially for ceremonial occasions, were made from expensive materials like silk, velvet, brocade, and fur, often heavily embroidered with gold or silver thread and adorned with pearls and precious stones. These garments were incredibly heavy, restricting your movement and making even simple acts like sitting or walking gracefully a conscious effort. You might joke that your morning routine felt less like getting ready and more like being expertly shrink-wrapped in a very expensive curtain. The shapes and silhouettes of medieval gowns were often designed to emphasize a long, slender line, or later, wide, flowing skirts. This could involve tight lacing in the bodice, restricting your breathing and potentially causing discomfort or even fainting spells, especially during long court ceremonies or in warm weather. Your internal organs might even be slightly displaced by the constant compression, though the full extent of this long-term damage is a subject of scholarly debate. Your headwear was equally restrictive, from simple veils and wimples covering your hair to elaborate horned hennons or towering velvet bonnets. These creations were often heavy, cumbersome, and designed to proclaim your status. Imagine the constant strain on your neck, or the difficulty navigating doorways without knocking your elaborate headpiece askew. You couldn't simply toss your hair back. It was meticulously braided, pinned, and hidden, a symbol of your modesty and marital status. A quirkier tidbit is that some extremely tall hennons were so impractical for daily wear that queens would have to duck to enter rooms or even pass through gates. Highlighting the triumph of fashion over function, footwear, too, was far from comfortable. While soft leather slippers might be worn indoors, outdoor shoes were often thin-soled and ill-suited for the damp, uneven surfaces of castle courtyards or the rough medieval roads you often traveled. Your feet would ache, and blisters would be a common companion, hidden beneath the luxurious hems of your gown. The constant need to maintain a pristine appearance in an era without effective stain removers or frequent laundering was another challenge. Heavy fabrics were difficult to clean, and spills or dirt could ruin an expensive garment. You were always aware of the need to protect your clothing, another subtle restriction on your movements and spontaneity. Historians still argue whether medieval fashion was primarily a form of social control, reinforcing hierarchical status, or if it also allowed for a degree of personal expression within prescribed norms. Beyond the physical discomfort, there was the psychological burden. Your clothing was a constant visual reminder of your status, an external manifestation of your role. You were always on display, always representing your kingdom and your husband. There was little room for casual comfort or personal style, only the rigid dictates of royal fashion. You couldn't simply throw on a comfortable tunic. Every outfit was a carefully constructed statement. So, as your ladies-in-waiting tighten the laces of your gown and adjust your heavy veil, you feel the familiar constraints settle upon you. The shimmering fabrics and glittering jewels are beautiful, a testament to immense wealth and power. But they are also a heavy burden, a physical manifestation of the gilded cage you inhabit. Being a medieval queen meant living a life of constant external display, where even your attire served as a daily reminder of your limited freedom and the endless demands of your station. Your fashion was a performance, and the stage was your entire life. Beyond the tangible discomforts of your attire and the relentless public scrutiny, being a medieval queen often brought with it a profound sense of loneliness of the crown. Despite being constantly surrounded by people, true connection, genuine intimacy, and authentic friendship were rare, elusive luxuries in the unforgiving world of royal courts. Imagine your daily life. You are never truly alone. From the moment you wake, your ladies-in-waiting attend you. As you move through the castle, guards, servants, and courtiers are always present, always watching. At meals, you sit at a high table, separate from the throng, perpetually on display. Conversations are often guarded, polite, and laden with unspoken political agendas. A mainstream historical fact is that genuine personal relationships were often sacrificed for dynastic and political necessity in royal families. Your marriage, remember, was a contract, not a love match, and while some royal couples developed affection, many remained distant, formal partners. You might joke that your closest confidants were probably the castle cats, and even they might be secretly judging your choice of medieval haute couture. Your husband, the king, might be distant, preoccupied with war, governance, or hunting, or simply prefer the company of his male advisors or mistresses. Emotional intimacy was not a prerequisite for a royal marriage, and often not even an expectation. You might share a bed, but not necessarily your thoughts or feelings. This lack of a deep personal bond with your spouse could be a profound source of isolation. Your ladies-in-waiting, while your constant companions, were often chosen for political reasons. Daughters of powerful nobles who served as a form of hostage or a means of influence. While some might become trusted confidants, others could be spies, reporting your private conversations or personal habits to their families or to rivals at court. You would always have to be careful about what you said, even in your own chambers. The constant awareness of being watched, of having your every word potentially misinterpreted or used against you, bred a deep sense of caution and emotional guardedness. Friendships with other noblewomen or foreign queens were also complicated by political allegiances. A queen from an allied kingdom might be a temporary friend, but if alliances shifted, that friendship could turn cold, or even hostile, overnight. There was little room for unadulterated affection or loyalty. Historians still argue about the extent of emotional intimacy and personal agency available to medieval queens. While some queens undoubtedly found ways to forge genuine bonds, many primary sources hint at lives of profound emotional isolation, where the demands of the crown outweighed personal happiness. The constant need to maintain a dignified, impenetrable facade meant that expressing vulnerability or seeking genuine comfort was often impossible. A quirkier tidbit: some queens found solace and intellectual companionship in religious life, corresponding with abbesses or holy women, or dedicating themselves to spiritual pursuits. These connections, often maintained through letters, offered a form of emotional outlet and intellectual engagement that might be lacking in their immediate court environment. So, your best friend might be a nun you've never met. The constant movement of royal progresses, which we discussed earlier, also contributed to loneliness. You were never truly rooted in one place, never able to form deep, lasting connections with a local community. Your world was the movable court, a transient collection of individuals who were often as isolated as you were, each playing their own part in the grand royal drama. So, as you sit in your magnificent chambers, perhaps embroidering by the dim light of a candle, you feel the vast, echoing silence around you. Even when the castle is bustling, the weight of the crown isn't just about duty or danger. It's about the profound human cost of constant performance and political maneuvering. Being a medieval queen meant living a life surrounded by people, yet often feeling utterly, achingly alone. A solitary figure atop a gilded, yet often desolate, peak. Having explored the emotional isolation that often accompanied your crown, let's now turn to a more fundamental aspect of daily life that often belied the image of royal abundance: food, feast, and famine, while you, as queen, would undoubtedly experience lavish banquets. The medieval reality of diet was far more precarious and often less palatable than imagined, even for royalty. Imagine a grand royal feast, an impressive display of wealth and power. The great hall would be ablaze with torchlight, filled with the murmur of voices and the sounds of musicians. Platters laden with roasted meats, venison, boar, swan would be carried in, alongside ornate pies, rich stews, and a variety of breads. Sweet wines would flow freely. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval royal feasts were elaborate affairs designed to showcase the monarch's wealth and generosity, often serving dozens of dishes over several courses. You might joke that your medieval nutritionist would probably have a heart attack just looking at the menu. However, beneath this veneer of abundance lay several challenging realities. Firstly, food preservation was rudimentary. Without refrigeration, meat and dairy products spoiled quickly, while salting, smoking, and pickling were common methods. They altered the taste and nutritional value. Spices, imported at great expense, were often used not just for flavor, but to mask the taste of slightly spoiled food. Imagine a rich stew, fragrant with exotic spices, yet with a faint, unsettling undertone that you politely ignore. Dietary variety was often limited by seasonality and geography. While you'd have access to the best produce available, fresh fruits and vegetables were only around for certain parts of the year. During winter, your diet would rely heavily on preserved meats, dried grains, and root vegetables, which could lead to nutritional deficiencies over time. A lack of vitamin C, for example, could lead to scurvy, a debilitating disease characterized by bleeding gums and extreme fatigue. Even among the nobility, the sheer richness and quantity of food at feasts could also lead to health issues. Gout, a painful form of arthritis often linked to excessive consumption of rich foods and alcohol, was a common ailment among the wealthy. Indigestion and other digestive complaints would be frequent companions, as your body struggled to process vast quantities of rich, often heavily spiced, food. A quirkier tidbit is that medieval banquets often featured subtleties, elaborate, edible sculptures made from marzipan or other foods, purely for visual display, rather than for consumption. So, you might have been served a sugar castle you couldn't eat. Then there was the ever-present threat of famine, while you, as queen, would be buffered by royal stores and the ability to demand provisions from your lands. Even royal households were not immune to widespread crop failures, prolonged sieges, or disruptions to trade caused by war. During times of scarcity, the quality and quantity of your food would inevitably decline, and while you might not starve, your meals would become significantly less appealing and nutritious. You might witness the suffering of your subjects, which could be a sobering reminder of your precarious position even atop the social hierarchy. Historians still argue about the true nutritional status of medieval royalty. While they consumed more protein and fats than commoners, their diet could still be imbalanced, lacking in certain vitamins and minerals, and often contaminated. The prevalence of intestinal parasites, even among the wealthy, due to poor sanitation and food handling, further complicated nutrient absorption. The rituals surrounding medieval dining were also demanding. Long hours spent at table, elaborate etiquette, and the constant presence of courtiers meant that even meals were a performance. You couldn't simply grab a quick, healthy snack. Every meal was an event, a public display. So, as you lift a goblet of wine or carve into a roasted capon at a lavish banquet, you are acutely aware of the complexities of medieval food. The feast is a display of power and abundance, but it's also a testament to the limitations of the era, the constant balancing act between celebratory excess and the underlying threat of scarcity. Spoilage and nutritional deficiency made even the simple act of eating a far more precarious and considered affair than it is today. Your daily bread, even if it was made from the finest flour, came with its own set of hidden challenges. Having navigated the intricate dance of royal dining, let's turn to a more inescapable threat that recognized no crown or noble lineage disease: a royal killer. Despite your wealth, access to physicians, and relative comfort, medieval queens were just as vulnerable, and often succumbed to the same horrifying illnesses that plagued commoners, sometimes with even less privacy or dignity. Imagine waking with a sudden chill, a racking cough, or an overwhelming fatigue. While you might have a dedicated physician at your court, their understanding of disease, as we've explored, was based on humoral theory, not germ theory. Treatments often involved bloodletting, purging, or herbal concoctions, which could be ineffective or even harmful. A mainstream historical fact is that infectious diseases like plague, smallpox, measles, and influenza swept through medieval Europe indiscriminately, affecting all social classes, often with devastating mortality rates. You might joke, darkly, that the Grim Reaper didn't care about your noble title. Consider the common cold or influenza. What for us is a few days of sniffles and aches could, for a medieval queen, easily escalate into pneumonia, especially in damp, drafty castles with limited access to consistent warmth. A simple fever could be a symptom of countless deadly infections, from typhus to dysentery, both rampant in crowded living conditions. Your body, already weakened by frequent pregnancies or the rigors of travel, would be more susceptible. The lack of personal hygiene, even in royal households, contributed significantly to the spread of disease. While you might bathe more frequently than some, the limited access to running water, the use of shared basins, and the constant presence of vermin, fleas, lice, rats meant that diseases could spread rapidly. Your elaborate, multi-layered clothing, rarely washed, could also harbor parasites and pathogens. Imagine the constant itch of unseen visitors, a small but persistent discomfort that could signal a much larger, life-threatening problem. For highly contagious diseases, there was little protection if a plague arrived. Your first instinct might be to flee your castle, as many monarchs did, to a more isolated country residence. But escape was not always possible or effective. You'd witness courtiers, servants, and even family members fall ill and die around you, bringing the horror of the epidemic directly into your supposedly protected sphere. A quirkier tidbit is that medieval doctors sometimes advised patients, including royalty, to carry sweet-smelling herbs or sponges soaked in vinegar to ward off bad air miasma during epidemics. A futile but often practiced measure. Childhood diseases, which we discussed earlier, were a constant threat to your children, the very reason for your existence. Even if you survived childbirth, the anxiety for your offspring's health would be perpetual. The death of a royal child, especially a male heir, was not just a personal tragedy but a national crisis, and you, the queen, would often bear the brunt of the blame. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of medieval royal physicians. While they were undoubtedly the most educated and respected medical practitioners of their time, Their fundamental lack of understanding of microbiology meant that their interventions, though well-intentioned, were often powerless against the deadliest diseases. Their role was often more about providing comfort, managing symptoms, and offering prognosis rather than truly curing. The final indignity of disease for a queen was the lack of privacy and suffering. Your illness would be a matter of public record, watched by your court, with every symptom whispered about and analyzed for political implications. Your recovery, or your demise, would be a matter of intense public interest and speculation. There was no quiet recovery. Your body, even in sickness, remained a political object. So, as you feel the onset of a fever, or the persistent ache of a cough, you understand that your crown offers no true immunity. The grim reality of medieval disease is a constant, terrifying reminder that even at the pinnacle of society, you are fundamentally human, vulnerable to the same relentless biological forces that afflict the lowliest peasant. Your wealth could buy you comfort, but it could not buy you immortality or freedom from suffering. Given the inherent precarity of your position as a medieval queen, even when you weren't battling disease, another pervasive threat loomed over your existence: the constant risk of captivity and banishment. Your value was intrinsically linked to your political utility, and if that utility waned, or if you became a political liability, your royal status offered little protection from a swift and brutal fall from grace. Imagine a scenario where your husband loses a critical battle, or a political faction at court turns against him. You, as his queen, are immediately vulnerable. You could be taken as a hostage by a rival lord, imprisoned to exert pressure on your husband, or held captive to prevent you from raising support for your side. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval queens, even powerful ones, were frequently imprisoned or held under house arrest during periods of political instability, dynastic disputes, or civil war. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages, was famously imprisoned for 16 years by her husband, Henry II of England. You might joke, bitterly, that your royal chamber could turn into a prison cell with remarkably little redecoration. Life in captivity was far from comfortable. You might be confined to a single room or a small suite of chambers, constantly guarded, your movements restricted. Your ladies-in-waiting might be dismissed, leaving you isolated. Food could be sparse or unpleasant, and your health could suffer from the lack of fresh air, exercise, and proper nutrition. The psychological toll of confinement, of being stripped of your freedom and dignity, would be immense. You would live with the constant uncertainty of your fate, wondering if you would ever be released, or if your captivity would eventually end in your death. Banishment, or forced exile, was another common fate. If your marriage was annulled, perhaps due to a lack of male heirs, or if you were accused of a serious crime like treason or adultery, often trumped-up charges for political expediency, you could be sent away from court, stripped of your titles, and confined to a remote abbey or a distant dower land. This wasn't a comfortable retirement. It was a form of political death, removing you from all influence in public life. Imagine being separated from your children, perhaps forever, living out your days in forced solitude, a forgotten figure from a past era. The threat of being repudiated or replaced was ever present, especially if you failed to produce a male heir, or if your political alliance became unfavorable. While annulment required papal approval, kings would often push for it if a queen was no longer useful. In some more brutal cases, kings might even accuse a queen of a capital crime to execute her, as famously happened later with Anne Boleyn, though such extremes were generally less common in the earlier Middle Ages. Historians still argue about the precise motivations behind specific cases of royal imprisonment and banishment. While some were clearly for political gain, others might have involved genuine concerns about a queen's perceived disloyalty or mental instability. Your personal safety was never guaranteed. Even within your own court, poison was a whispered fear. And while concrete evidence is rare, the paranoia surrounding it was real. An unexpected illness could always be attributed to foul play, adding another layer of anxiety to your life. A quirkier tidbit is that some queens, even when in a precarious position, would try to maintain correspondence with their original family or loyal supporters, using coded messages or trusted couriers, in an effort to maintain a network for potential rescue or restoration. So, as you walk the castle corridors, you are acutely aware that your status, while seemingly exalted, rests on a fragile foundation of political utility and the king's favor. The threat of losing it all, your freedom, your children, your very life, is a constant, cold presence. Being a medieval queen meant living under the perpetual sword of Damocles, knowing that at any moment, the gilded cage could transform into a grim prison, or the royal road could lead to desolate exile, all at the whim of power beyond your control. After navigating the political minefield, the personal discomforts, and the very real dangers of your life, you realize that for a medieval queen, the ultimate measure of success was rarely personal happiness or individual achievement. Instead, your worth was almost entirely encapsulated in your legacy, not lived happiness. Your life was a means to an end, the continuation and glory of your dynasty. Imagine looking back over your life. The grand ceremonies, the endless travels, the political maneuvers, the painful childbirths, all were geared towards a singular purpose. Your legacy was etched not in personal joy, but in the strength of your lineage. A mainstream historical fact is that the most significant contribution a medieval queen was expected to make was the production of healthy children, especially male heirs, to secure the succession and prevent dynastic crises. If you provided a thriving line of succession, you were deemed a success, regardless of the personal sacrifices you endured. You might joke, with a tired sigh, that your epitaph would probably read, "She gave birth, a lot." Your children, particularly your sons, were not just your beloved offspring. They were living embodiments of your dynastic success, their survival, their good health, and their eventual accession to the throne were your ultimate triumph. The fear of infant mortality, which we discussed earlier, was a constant shadow, for the death of an heir could unravel years of careful political maneuvering and plunge a kingdom into chaos. The legacy of a queen who failed to produce a male heir, or whose sons died young, was often one of disappointment and potential blame, beyond progeny. Your legacy was also measured by the stability and prosperity you contributed to the kingdom. If you successfully managed a regency, protected your son's inheritance, or fostered a period of peace through your diplomatic connections, these achievements would be credited to your political acumen, often remembered long after your personal struggles were forgotten. Your patronage of religious institutions, monasteries, and churches, or your support for the arts and learning, could also contribute to a lasting, positive image, ensuring prayers for your soul and remembrance for your piety. However, your personal feelings, desires, or unfulfilled ambitions were largely irrelevant to this grand historical narrative. There was no concept of self-care or work-life balance for a medieval queen. Your entire existence was defined by your public role, by your service to the crown and the dynasty, the moments of genuine happiness, perhaps a fleeting moment with your children, a rare, quiet afternoon reading, or a truly supportive interaction with your husband, were likely precious, isolated islands in a vast ocean of duty. Historians still argue about how medieval queens themselves perceived their lives. Did they internalize the patriarchal expectations and find fulfillment within their roles? Or did they quietly chafe against the constraints, dreaming of a different kind of life? The answers are elusive, hidden behind formal chronicles and official correspondence, rarely revealing the true thoughts of the women behind the crown, a quirkier tidbit upon their death. Some queens' hearts or other organs were sometimes buried separately in places they had founded or favored, a symbolic gesture to distribute their sacred presence and extend their spiritual patronage beyond their physical burial site. This ritual highlights how even in death, a queen's body was a symbolic object, intertwined with the realm. So, as your long, demanding life as a medieval queen reaches its inevitable end, you understand that your story will be told not through your personal joys or sorrows, but through the enduring strength of the lineage you helped to establish. Your crown, heavy throughout your life, finds its final rest, but its legacy lives on through the children you bore, the alliances you forged, and the stability you contributed to a turbulent age. You were a living bridge between generations, a crucial link in the chain of power, and your ultimate worth lay not in your lived happiness, but in the unwavering service to your dynasty, forever etched into the unforgiving annals of history. The air in your room grows still now, the faint sounds of the night settling around you, the distant echoes of heavy fabrics, the whispers of courtiers, the imagined cries of a newborn. They all begin to fade, dissolving back into the quiet hum of history, the chill of ancient stone, the scent of wood smoke, the subtle discomfort of an ornate gown. They are but faint whispers on the edges of your awareness. Let the weight of that distant past, the lives lived and lost, gently recede from your mind. Your own bed is soft, your blankets are warm, and the only sounds now are those of your quiet breathing. There's nothing more to do, nowhere else to be. Just rest. Let your mind drift, free from the burdens of crowns and dynasties. All the struggles and triumphs of those long-ago queens have come to their own peaceful conclusion. You are safe, here and now. Just let go. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.